German territory below, anti-aircraft guns along the coast, fighter bases at Abbeville and Pua. Johnson figured his chances to reach England were just about zero. Then he saw it, the worst possible sight. A Fokker Wolf FW-190 sliding in behind him, blue and yellow nose, the mark of an expertise. Johnson had nothing. His gun sight was wrecked, hydraulics shot, guns useless. He was limping along at maybe 200 mph, just above stall speed. The German lined up the shot. At 300 yards, the FW-190 opened fire. Machine gun bullets hammered the P-47. The noise was deafening. Metal screamed as rounds tore through the fuselage. The armor plate behind Johnson's seat rang out as bullets smashed into it over and over. The fabric shredded, control cables frayed. The instrument panel, already ruined, dissolved into pieces. Johnson hunched forward, trying to make himself small behind the armor plate. The German pilot, maybe Egon Meyer, though nobody's sure, fired in short, precise bursts. Professional, methodical, the FW-190 carried 1,000 rounds of 7.92 Lear for its guns. The 20mm cannons were probably empty from earlier fighting. For 3 straight minutes, the German kept at it. Short bursts to save ammo, each one aimed at the engine cowling, the wing roots, control surfaces, fuel tanks. The P-47 just soaked it up and kept flying. The R-2800 engine, limping along on 14 cylinders, somehow held together. The control surfaces, ripped and battered, still worked. Even the self-sealing tanks, though leaking, didn't give up. The FW-190 pulled up alongside. Through the shattered canopy, Johnson could see the German pilot staring at his battered Thunderbolt. The German just shook his head like he couldn't believe what he was seeing. No plane should survive this kind of punishment. The FW-190 dropped back, tried again. More gunfire raked the Thunderbolt. Wings, fuselage, tail, elevator trim tabs gone. Rudder shot to pieces. Ailerons punched full of holes. Still, the P-47 held together. This time, the German pulled alongside, out of ammo or just done trying. He looked over, rocked his wings, a salute maybe, then turned for France. Johnson limped on, engine running worse by the minute, power fading, oil pressure dropping to nothing. The English coast finally showed through the filthy windscreen. RAF Manston was 10 miles inland. No radio, no instruments, no way to call for help. He came in low, hoping someone would spot a shot-up American fighter in trouble. The landing wasn't much of a landing, more like a controlled crash. No flaps, no hydraulics, no brakes. The main gear, forced down by emergency extension, somehow stayed put. The Thunderbolt rolled the full length of the runway before grinding to a stop. Fire crews and medics swarmed the plane, but the canopy wouldn't budge. Cannon hits had jammed it for good. They hacked through the plexiglass with fire axes. Johnson crawled out, soaked in hydraulic fluid, streaked with blood and oil. He staggered around his wrecked P-47 and tried counting the bullet holes, gave up after 200 on one side alone. Later, they tallied at least 21 hits from 20 midi-cannons and more than 200 machine gun rounds. One cannon shell punched right through the armor plate behind Johnson's seat, didn't explode, and left this perfect 20mm hole. If it had been just half an inch over, Johnson would have been dead. The plane, nicknamed Half Pint, was totaled. No fixing it. But Johnson didn't miss a beat. 4 days later, he was back in the air in a new P-47. That was just the start. Johnson racked up 27 aerial victories, ending up as one of the top American aces in Europe. His brush with death on June 26, 1943, became the stuff of legend among P-47 pilots, proof that their planes could take insane amounts of damage and still get them home. Word got around fast. German pilots started worrying. Allied intelligence picked up on their chatter. American super fighters were showing up in reports, looking impossible to shoot down. German pilots even started calling them Betonflugzeug, concrete aircraft. the Luftwaffe rewrote its manuals, telling pilots to only attack P-47s with concentrated 20mm cannon fire, aiming for the turbo supercharger intake, the oil cooler, or the cockpit. Even then, they barely made a dent. Stories spread. Captain Fred Christensen's P-47 came back with 47 bullet holes and 6 20mm cannon hits on July 29, 1943. Lieutenant Ralph Johnson flew home with a cylinder shot right off his engine in August. Captain Walker Mahurin landed with a P-47 that looked like Swiss cheese after a scrap on October 4th. It took 6 weeks to patch that plane up, but it still returned to combat. Captain Barney Wazowicz, the 56th Fighter Group's engineering officer, kept track of the damage. Most hits zeroed in on engines and cockpits, but the R-2800 engine could keep running even if 3 cylinders were completely destroyed. Pilots managed oil loss by throttling back and letting in more cooling air. The turbo supercharger, tucked away in the back, sat behind armor and fuel tanks. A tough target. Only a direct hit from a 30mm cannon could reliably bring down a P-47, and not many German fighters carried guns that heavy. The numbers told the real story. By December 1943, the 56th Fighter Group had flown 5,147 combat sorties. Enemy fire destroyed only 56 aircraft, 34 pilots killed in action. The loss rate per mission? Not even 1%. Meanwhile, German fighter units going after American bombers lost over 15% of their planes each mission. They couldn't keep up. Why were P-47s so tough? The R-2800 engine was built for redundancy, 2 rows of 9 cylinders, dual magnetos for backup ignition, and 2 oil systems. Even after taking a beating, the engine could still kick out some power. The front end of the engine wasn't just for show, it acted like a shield. Any bullet had to plow through 6 feet of engine to reach the pilot. The rest of the plane was just as sturdy, wings that could take 12G loads, backup control cables, armored and self-sealing fuel tanks, ammo stored out of harm's way. Everything was built with battle damage in mind. Over in Farmingdale, Long Island, Republic Aviation churned out P-47s at a wild pace, up to 16 a day. Total production hit 15,683, more than any other American fighter. For every P-47 lost, 10 more rolled off the line. Pilot training kept pace. Churning out new aviators faster than combat could thin their ranks. By spring 1944, P-47 groups had nailed down air superiority over Western Europe. The kill ratio shot up to 4.6 to 1 in favor of the Americans. But the real victory was in bomber protection. Before the P-47s started flying escort, bombers were getting hammered, losing over 10% of their crews each mission. With the Thunderbolts on guard, losses dropped below 2%. That difference saved thousands of airmen. Major General William Kepner, head of the 8th Fighter Command, saw what the P-47 brought to the table. The Thunderbolt proved that toughness mattered as much as speed or firepower. A pilot who knows his plane can take a pounding fights harder and takes more risks. That kind of confidence changes the whole game. German commanders saw it too. Luftwaffe. General Adolf Galland wrote in his memoirs, "The P-47 was a flying tank. Our pilots learned to stay clear unless they had a big tactical edge. Those American fighters just kept flying, even with damage that would have finished any German plane." In the end, tactics had to change to keep up with the raw mechanical reality of the Thunderbolt. Colonel Hubert Z. Carr came up with the Xenofan formation, using the P-47's toughness to shake up the usual escort tactics. Instead of sticking close to the bombers, these Thunderbolts pushed out ahead and to the sides, hunting down German fighters before they even got close. It wasn't a job for just any plane. You needed something that could take a beating and still fly. Only the P-47 really fit that bill. The tactic showed its worth on February 11th, 1944. The 56th Fighter Group split off from the bombers and ran into a pack of about 60 German fighters getting ready to pounce. In the fight that followed, the P-47s shot down 17 enemy planes and lost just 2 of their own. Some Thunderbolts limped home with damage that would have sent other planes crashing. Lieutenant Roach, for example, made it back with his whole left elevator shot away. Captain Gabreski managed to land with his engine barely running, just 12 cylinders left, and the cowling riddled with holes. Gabreski went on to become the top American ace in Europe with 28 kills, all in P-47s. His plane took some nasty hits over the course of the war. On November 26, 1943, a 20mm shell exploded in his turbo supercharger at 30,000 feet. He lost all boost pressure, but still managed to glide 80 miles to safety, the engine just barely giving him enough to avoid landing behind enemy lines. P-47s really proved themselves on ground attack missions. Flying low over enemy targets meant flying straight into a storm of anti-aircraft fire. Light flak, 20mm and 37mm, came at them faster than 120 rounds a minute. The heavy stuff, 80mm, exploded right at the altitude where the planes flew. The odds of survival looked grim on paper, but Thunderbolts kept coming back from missions that would have been suicide in anything else. On December 23, 1944, during the Battle of the Bulge, the 56th Fighter Group went out for ground support in weather so bad most other planes stayed grounded. Visibility was less than a mile, cloud cover at 400 feet. Even then, P-47s went after German tanks at treetop height. Captain Robert Brooking's plane took 87 hits from small arms and automatic weapons. He brought it home with cylinders shot out, oil pouring from the nose, and controls barely working. They patched up his Thunderbolt, and 3 days later it was flying again. The 9th Air Force, which specialized in ground support, kept records. From June 6, 1944 to May 8, 1945, Thunderbolts flew 135,000 ground attack sorties. Enemy fire damaged 4,293 planes and destroyed 824, but the survival rate after taking hits was 80.8%. No other plane matched that. Lieutenant Colonel Kinnard had his own close call on January 1st, 1945. He was attacking a German train when his P-47 hit high-tension wires. The propeller bent, the cowling crushed, the oil cooler wrecked. Still, he managed to fly 40 miles back to base, the engine overheating so badly it seized up right after he landed. They swapped out the engine, and a week later, the plane was back in action. The Thunderbolt's impact on the German war machine was brutal. P-47s destroyed 86,000 railway cars, 9,000 locomotives, 6,000 armored vehicles, and 68,000 trucks. German supply lines fell apart, not because of high-altitude bombing, but because Thunderbolts battered their way through ground fire and kept hammering targets. Things in the Pacific were different, but the P-47 story stayed the same. Flying from the Philippines, Thunderbolts faced Japanese anti-aircraft guns and fighters. The distances out there meant reliability was everything. If your engine quit, odds were you'd end up in shark-infested water. Still, P-47s had the lowest loss rate of any fighter in the Pacific. The R-28,000 engine kept running, even damaged, and saved a lot of pilots from going down at sea. Colonel Neil Kirby led the 348th Fighter Group and showed what the P-47 could do out there. On October 11, 1943, he took 4 Thunderbolts up against 36 Japanese planes. During the fight, Kirby shot down 6 himself. His plane took hits from 7.7mm and 12.7mm guns, but it kept flying. Kirby racked up 22 kills before March 5, 1944, when Sheer numbers finally brought him down. The Japanese called the P-47 the monster because it was huge and seemed impossible to kill. Their pilot manuals warned them not to take on Thunderbolts unless they had a big numbers advantage. Their usual hit-and-run attacks just didn't work. Quick firing passes couldn't do enough damage to stop P-47. Japanese pilots ran into a wall when they faced the P-47. The Thunderbolt's guns chewed through enemy planes, and American factories pumped out these beasts at a rate the Axis couldn't touch. Republic Aviation's massive Farmingdale plant sprawled across 2.5 million square feet, and at its busiest, 24,000 people worked there. The Evansville, Indiana plant chipped in too, adding even more muscle. Together, they rolled out more P-47s than Germany built fighters of any type, period. The numbers didn't lie. America's factories, plus the P-47's ruggedness, gave the Allies an edge nothing could erase. Money-wise, the math was just as telling. In 1944, a single P-47D cost about $85,000. Training a pilot ran another $75,000. So you're looking at $160,000 for one plane and its pilot. But the P-47 could take a beating and keep flying. If its toughness saved even one pilot, it paid for itself. In reality, it saved hundreds of pilots who would have died flying something flimsier. The 56th Fighter Group proved the point. They racked up 637.5 aerial victories, the most of any American unit in Europe, all while sticking with the Thunderbolt. There was plenty of pressure to switch to the P-51 Mustang, but Colonel David Schilling wouldn't budge. We stayed with the Thunderbolt because our pilots trusted it absolutely. They knew that no matter how badly damaged, the P-47 would probably get them home. Stories piled up. Lieutenant Quint Brown's P-47 smashed into a Focke-Wulf 190 on February 8, 1944. 3 feet of wing gone, engine cowling crushed, propeller bent. He still nursed it back 200 miles to base and landed, and the ground crew fixed it up for more combat. The German pilot died in the crash. Captain Johnson McGinn took a direct hit from an 88-meter shell. It punched a hole in his wing big enough for a man to crawl through. The wing flexed wildly on the flight home, but he made it. Republic engineers studied the wrecked plane, shaking their heads. Any other fighter would have fallen apart. These moments shaped future designs. The A-10 Thunderbolt II, built in the 1970s, took the P-47's lessons to heart: tough airframes, armored cockpits, backup hydraulic systems, engines set up high. They wanted to build a plane as hard to kill as the original Thunderbolt. Veteran pilots never forgot that feeling. Lieutenant Colonel Robert Bassler said, "Flying the P-47, I never worried about the airplane failing me. Engine problems, battle damage, system failures. The Thunderbolt handled them all. That confidence let me focus on fighting rather than worrying about survival." German aces felt the difference. Luftwaffe Asse Heinz Beer, with 220 victories, called the P-47 their most frustrating enemy. "We would score hits that should destroy any aircraft, watch pieces fly off, see smoke and flames, yet the Thunderbolt would continue flying and often shoot back accurately. It defied our understanding of combat damage." On the ground, mechanics saw the same thing. Crew Chief Sergeant Anthony Garzino remembered, "We'd see Thunderbolts return with damage that seemed impossible. Cylinders shot off, oil lines severed, control cables hanging by threads. We'd work all night and the plane would fly again next day." The P-47 was designed to be fixed, not just flown. Stats back up the stories. The 56th Fighter Group's maintenance logs showed 73% of damaged Thunderbolts were back in the air within 72 hours. Major repairs usually wrapped up within 2 weeks, unless the plane was totally destroyed or lost over enemy lines. That kind of turnaround was unheard of in wartime aviation. The supply chain behind it was just as relentless. Pratt and Whitney built 125,000 R-2800 engines during the war, each one packed with 2,900 parts. Spare parts, ammo, and fuel crossed oceans. If a P-47 in England needed a replacement part, it could get one from Connecticut in less than 2 weeks. Ammunition tells the story too. Each Thunderbolt carried 3,400 rounds of 50 caliber bullets, and the 56th alone fired off more than 10 million rounds during the war. Every single one got made, shipped, and loaded by hand. Keeping those planes fighting was a triumph in itself. But strip away the stats and machinery, and it comes down to this. Every time a P-47 limped home full of holes, a pilot lived to fight another day. That's what really mattered. When you look at the numbers, the P-47's survivability didn't just matter on paper. It meant real people, fathers, sons, husbands, came home when the war was over. And that's thousands of families with someone to hug again. Lieutenant Colonel Francis Gabreski, who shot down more enemy planes in a P-47 than anyone else, got right to the heart of it. The Thunderbolt gave pilots the guts to take on bigger enemy groups, bomb heavily defended targets, and keep attacking even when their planes took hits. As long as you took care of your Thunderbolt, it would get you home. That trust between pilot and machine, that's what turned the air war. Why, the statistics tell the story too. They built 15,183 P-47s in combat. They lost 3,499. Pilots flew 746,000 combat missions. The Thunderbolt shot down 4.6 enemy planes for everyone it lost in the air, and less than 1% of sorties ended in a loss. But behind those numbers is something bigger. The P-47 changed how everyone thought about air combat. Its toughness forced the enemy to rethink how they fought. By the end, even German pilots respected and maybe even feared the Thunderbolt. German training manuals in 1945 flat out warned, don't mess with P-47s unless you have big numbers and a clear edge. If you have to fight, try to damage the oil cooler or turbo intake, but don't expect a lucky shot to take it down. This American plane survives hits that would destroy any German fighter. The legacy of the P-47 went way beyond kill counts. It proved you could build a fighter that kept pilots alive without turning it into a slug. Before the P-47, designers focused almost entirely on speed and agility. The Thunderbolt changed that. It showed that saving pilots mattered just as much as shooting down enemies, and that idea shaped military planes for decades. Republic Aviation's own test pilots saw what made the P-47 so tough. They built everything stronger than anyone thought necessary. The wing spars could handle 12 Gs, even though 9 Gs was the standard. Control cables were twice as thick as usual. They ran fuel lines through protected spaces and beefed up engine mounts so pilots could walk away from crash landings. The plane was heavy, sure, but that weight kept people alive. And the size, once seen as a flaw, turned out to be a big advantage. It gave room for armor, backup systems, and extra structure. The massive engine up front acted like a shield. Wide landing gear let pilots bring it down safely, even with damaged tires. Things that looked like weaknesses, they were actually strengths. Combat tactics changed to take advantage of the Thunderbolt's design. P-47s dove from high up, using their insane diving speed, over 500 knots, to strike hard, then climbed back up before the enemy could react. In head-on passes, the big engine up front took the brunt of enemy fire. You needed a plane that could take hits and keep flying. The P-47 delivered. The factory story is just as dramatic. Republic Aviation went from a small operation, 30 planes a month in 1941, to a powerhouse turning out 500 a month by 1944. The workforce exploded from 3,000 to 24,000. They overhauled how they built planes but never cut corners. Every engine got an 8-hour test run. Every P-47 flew before delivery. If a defect could put a pilot at risk, they fixed it, no excuses. Workers knew their work saved lives. Signs around the factory reminded them, a pilot's life depends on your work. The learning curve was steep. Early models had engine issues, radio problems, and canopies that stuck, but they worked through every bug. By the time the P-47D rolled out, reliability was through the roof. Engineers kept tweaking survivability features based on real combat damage. Training changed too. The P-47 was heavy and powerful. Pilots had to learn new flying techniques. They managed energy, kept up their speed, and fought vertically instead of turning in circles. They learned to trust their plane, to take hits, and keep going. Training bases from Connecticut to New Jersey turned out pilots who could wring every advantage out of the Thunderbolt. And when you compared the P-47 to German planes, the difference was clear. The Bf-109's engine would quit with just one hit to the coolant. The FW-190's BMW 801 was tougher, but still vulnerable if you hit the oil system. Neither German fighter had the P-47's armor, backup systems, or brute strength. German pilots knew if they took serious damage, odds were they wouldn't make it home. Allied intelligence saw what that did to their morale. When Allied intelligence started picking up German radio chatter, one thing stood out. German pilots were getting more and more nervous about tangling with P-47 Thunderbolts. You could feel Luftwaffe morale slipping. Imagine watching your own planes go down in flames from a single burst of 50 caliber fire, while those hulking Thunderbolts, sometimes trailing smoke and riddled with holes, just kept flying. German doctors even started talking about Thunderbolt fever in their medical reports, a real anxiety problem among pilots tasked with intercepting P-47s. Over in the Pacific, the story played out a little differently, but the point was the same. Out there, engine reliability wasn't just nice to have, it kept you alive. When the nearest friendly base might be 500 miles away, you needed an engine that could take a beating and keep running. The R-2800 was just that. Navy pilots flying Grumman F-6F Hellcats and Vought F-4U Corsairs, both powered by the same engine, noticed the same thing. These planes could soak up punishment and still get you home. The ground crews deserve some applause too. They pulled off repairs that by all rights belonged in a factory, not some muddy forward airstrip, swapping out cylinders, rebuilding control surfaces from whatever scrap they could find, overhauling engines with artillery shells landing nearby. Nothing seemed impossible. The P-47's design made all this doable, while other planes would have needed to be shipped out for repairs. Republic Aviation didn't just build tough planes. They reinvented spare parts logistics. Every single part got a number, tracked and shipped right where it was needed. Essential items were already at forward bases before anyone asked. That kept the Thunderbolts flying, over 80% availability, even in the thick of combat. If you want proof, just look at the gun camera footage. There are clips of Thunderbolts shrugging off streams of cannon fire, still under control. Or check out the post-mission photos. Wings with holes you could stick your arm through, fuselages peppered like a colander, engines missing whole cylinders. Yet these planes made it home under their own power. And that mattered. Every P-47 that limped back saved a pilot, someone with precious training and experience. You couldn't just replace those guys. Their survival kept units combat ready. The Luftwaffe, on the other hand, kept losing its best, and the whole force started to unravel. Weather, no problem. The P-47's rugged build meant it could fly when lighter planes sat grounded. Ice manageable. Turbulence absorbed. Mud and rain that shut down German planes. Just part of the job for Thunderbolts. Even limited night missions became possible with flame dampeners and basic instruments. The plane handled well enough that pilots could survive damage at night that would have doomed them in something twitchier. March 1945, the Rhine crossings. This was the big test. P-47s flew back-to-back missions supporting ground troops through flak, emergency German fighter attacks, even handheld anti-aircraft weapons. The Thunderbolts took hits nobody thought possible, but they kept coming. Not a single Allied unit got left hanging for air support because of P-47 losses. Colonel Zemke, who led the 56th Fighter Group, put it best. The P-47 changed the fundamental equation of air combat. Before, performance was everything. The Thunderbolt proved survivability could beat pure stats. Our pilots learned they could take damage that would destroy an enemy plane and keep fighting. That confidence changed the game. The numbers back him up. By VE Day, P-47s had flown more combat sorties than any other American fighter. They dropped more bombs, fired more rockets, destroyed more targets, and above all, brought more pilots home alive, even when shot full of holes. Adolf Galland, the German ace, summed it up. The P-47 wasn't the fastest, the best turning, or the longest-ranged Allied fighter, but it was the one German pilots feared most. The unbreakable, they called it, and that's what mattered in the end. The last P-47 combat mission in Europe flew on May 7, 1945. The plane came home with 23 bullet holes from German flak. The pilot, unscathed. The Thunderbolt could have flown again if the war hadn't ended. Honestly, it was a perfect ending for a plane that never stopped surprising its enemies. The P-47 Thunderbolt could take a beating like nothing else. Pilots talked about it for years. Some still do. The Thunderbolt's reputation lived on, not just in stories, but in the very DNA of modern military aircraft. You see it everywhere: backup systems, thick armor, a structure built to take punishment. Today's planes owe a lot to the lessons hammered out in those old dog fights. But calling the P-47 just a tough airplane doesn't quite capture it. This was American industry at full tilt. Throw everything you've got at the problem, then add more. Out-engineer the enemy, outbuild them. The Thunderbolt showed everyone that smart design and raw material muscle could tip the scales in a fight. And maybe most important, it proved that saving pilots' lives wasn't just the right thing to do, it was what won wars. Ask the German pilots who tangled with Thunderbolts. They never forgot. Years later, they'd shake their heads, describing how these American planes soaked up damage that should have meant a one-way ticket to the ground. Instead, the P-47s kept flying, kept shooting, and kept coming home. That kind of resilience did more than win battles. It got inside the enemy's head, facing a plane that just wouldn't die. Wore them down, and it mattered. Sure, the numbers were impressive. But the real story, it's personal. Every statistic meant a pilot made it home. Families stayed whole. Kids grew up with their dads, and towns got to cheer their heroes. That's what really counted. The Thunderbolt's biggest victory wasn't in the enemy planes it shot down, but in the Americans it brought back alive. It proved that in the deadly game of air combat, sometimes the ability to survive matters just as much as firepower or speed. German pilots couldn't believe what they were seeing. These planes didn't just bend the rules of aviation. Sometimes it felt like they broke them outright. The P-47 could shrug off hits that would tear any other fighter apart. It just kept going. That's what set it apart. Not just dominating the skies, but saving the men who would go up again the next day. Over Europe, over the Pacific, wherever the fighting was hardest, the Thunderbolt made its mark. It was more than a machine. It was a promise. You have a fighting chance. In the end, that's what made it legendary. The P-47 was the fighter that survived,